Hello, beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're having conversations about the awakening spiritual path, and what does that even mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, the beauty and the crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? So just a little update on this end, that now we're putting episodes out once per month. So if you want to be sure not to miss an episode with our new publishing schedule, just be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast player. And or you can subscribe to our email list, which is at blissandgrit.com. We'll send out episodes once they've come out, and we also send out resources we're loving from time to time. And if you're wanting more in-depth support as you navigate your own internal process, we do both also see clients privately. So feel free to go to the website for more information on that as well. And the last thing before we head into the conversation is that we do sometimes curse. So if you're in non-swearing company, you may want to wear headphones. Okay, here we go.
Hello, Brooke.
Hey, Vanessa.
And hello to all of you listening. It's so nice to be back here. Our last time together, we were interviewing Matt Kahn. So it's been a while since we got to have a one-on-one conversation.
Truly, yeah.
Well, for many of you who've listened for a while, you probably know that right before we sit down to record, Brooke and I catch up. We talk about our lives. We look for themes between what we're both exploring or learning, and we find a topic. And today, the theme was crystal clear.
Yeah, we both came in with the exact same parallel thing that we are dealing with right now.
Mm-hmm. Which often happens. And as you guys know, we like to use what's from our life so that this stays really embodied, really tangible, and really alive. So it also turns out that what we're going to discuss today builds a little bit off of something we started a conversation on with Matt Kahn in our last interview. And we could call it "What's Wrong with Me?" We could say, "There's something wrong with me." Or we could say, I have a part of me that's really wrong or flawed. So we can look at it from all these different angles. But Brooke and I both sat down and shared hilariously, because we have dark humor and laugh at our human foibles quite a bit, the ways in which we're observing our minds label ourselves as wrong somehow. So Brooke, do you want to begin by sharing your story of how this is turning up in your life personally?
Sure. Yeah, happily. Yeah. So we arrived here today, and we had been texting earlier all kinds of ideas about other stuff that we're thinking about or could talk about. And then something totally unrelated just came to the fore. So I've been spending my day feeling like an absolute screw up, an absolute idiot for buying a house last year, which is all kinds of hilarious. So I'll touch on the ways that that's irrelevant without boring people about my house buying story. But like many people, I mean, it was my first house. I'm a single parent, self-employed. So it felt like an extra big dream, like, will I ever be able to do that? It's a dream I had for a long time. And then last summer, that dream came true. I bought a house, and I spent anything that would have been considered emergency savings on a down payment for the house. And I got it for a good price. So my thinking was, this is a really smart decision because I'm securing affordable housing for me and my son. So this will be great. And then now here we are in a global pandemic. The majority of my income was touch-based work as a rolfer. So that's gone. And it just has started hitting me in the last couple of days. And, for those of you listening who are also touch-based workers, because I know we have a lot of people who are body workers out there, I don't mean to be glib about this because I'm sitting with this in a shock and also grief way where I'm realizing, and I'm in Connecticut near the New York area, and I'm in New Haven, which is a very international community because of Yale. So we have a lot of cases, is my point. A lot of cases. And I'm realizing, touch-based work might be gone for a year to a year and a half. And that dawned on me slowly, and I might be wrong. I very well could be wrong, but this is the projection that I'm sitting with today, projection of time. And so, of course, what boots right up is intense criticism of, I can't believe you bought this house. Like, you knew that there was something a little off about the foundation, and it was a little more than just a 90-year-old house settling. You knew that you were spending all of your savings on a down payment, and you knew that you were buying on a busy street and that irritates you. You knew. And at the time that I bought the house, there was just a number of ridiculous things happening. There were like big barriers that kept getting thrown in my path. Like my mother almost died and was hospitalized and was in the hospital. So of course, I was at the hospital constantly. That was, I was taking care of my dad too, emotionally, not physically. And I just kept, thinking, just push through, just persevere, just close on the house through all of that. So now I've turned it into a narrative of life kept telling you, don't do it. And you did it anyway. You're so stupid. Life was trying to warn you that something like this was coming or whatever. Maybe it wasn't trying to warn me of something specific, but life was trying to save you from a circumstance where you would be in a very bad financial pickle, right? Which is just so, so there's the level of is the story that I just told. And so I'm sure most people listening can relate, right? There are those moments where we're overly hard on ourselves. And then there's also the spiritual myth busting, right? This way that we can be extremely aggressive towards ourselves. Like, I'm supposed to be on a path of waking consciousness. I didn't follow the signs and signals from life. So I'm stupid, I'm a failure, and I'm bad at the path or whatever, so there's that's one of the second arrows. And it's all based on this foundation of that there's a me that's either getting things right or getting things wrong. And the pendulum's always swinging. We have these little moments of like, score, I did it, I got it right, whatever the right was. And then the pendulum's always going to find something to swing back on. Oh, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I did that. And we live our lives in this, when we're Velcroed into the thought, like I was Velcroed into the thoughts related to this. It just has to pick that realm of wrong. You got it wrong. You made a mistake. From the me point of view, from the consciousness or witness point of view, like we're just people experiencing lives, and lives contain many things, many emotions, good days, bad days, hardships, wins, and we're just the one here to experience it. So it's just very, very interesting to see how that quickly gloms, quickly attaches.
Oh, yes.
Your fault.
So fast.
You did it wrong.
Well, it feels so real when it's happening. I think this is the most important thing to drive home about our conditioning, our healing, is that when one of these long-term patterns comes up, we could call them wounds, we can call them traumas, we can call them pain bodies, but when one of these things arises, it feels realer than real. I think that's why, I'm sure many reasons why they use the analogy of being asleep and being awake, right? It's like you're just asleep in the dream. When I'm thinking I'm wrong, I just believe I'm wrong about that. And I may not be asleep in every area of my life, but it's like a trance. Who said that? The trance of unworthiness. Was that Tara Brach?
Oh,
Tara
I can't
Brach.
remember. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I think it was her. And she had a beautiful saying, the trance of unworthiness, because it's like when you're in that pattern, you're kind of asleep, you're hypnotized by the belief I'm unworthy and all of its attendant things that come with it, the feelings, the actions. So I hear you, Brooke, and I think maybe I'll tell my story. So it's almost like if y'all imagine, we're just going to take a look at this pattern. We're going to take a look at the pattern called something wrong with me. And then we'll start to look at the consciousness viewpoint and how we can maybe change the way we interact with the pattern, right? So this pattern that there's something wrong with me was showing up in my life too, exactly in a different way. And I think about these things as like an interpretation model. So if you imagine I have a screen in front of me, and the screen is my interpretation model, and my interpretation model is there's something wrong with me. And all the data, everything, all the stimuli that passes through that screen gets colored or tinged with there's something wrong with me. And so it keeps looping back to that same old, outdated interpretation that we either inherited or that arose in our life because something happened, right? That gave us that impression. So, for many of you, you know this, I have dealt with chronic illness in my life and really lifelong. Always something going on with my health. There's always been something going on with my health. And sadly, that remains to be true, even though I have healed so much, there's still things. So, as I'm dealing with this new symptom, or I should say an exacerbation of a symptom, I notice in the background of me having this physical distress, migraines, which are terrible, right? That in the background of it, I am feeling like a failure. That's the kind of voice that's going on. What's wrong with me that I can't figure this out? There's something wrong with me. Talk about spiritual myth busting, Brooke. Like, some kind of idea that if you're, it's so funny when we like bust our ideas.
Yes.
Like, I had an idea. Oh, well, if it's landing in my body, well, then I must be the densest of the dense because I'm not catching it in the energy realm. I'm not catching it in the emotional realm, right? So at first I have that idea. It's not true, everybody. PS. That's an idea that the kind of pattern of there's something wrong with me was kind of co-opting and creating. So that's just an idea. So I had the idea that there's something really wrong with me. And also, coming from, I do believe in the power of visualization to a certain extent. I believe in the power of our consciousness to a certain extent. So it's like, I'm not doing the things correctly. But this isn't new. This isn't just spiritual. This is a life of people saying, isn't it all in your head? How about you just exercise? You should eat a certain way. And in innocence, who wouldn't want hope? And who wouldn't believe that when our whole model was so materialistic for life? So it's like, yes, you have a body. The body's like a machine. Do the right things to the body and the body should function, right? And that's sort of what I grew up with. So I have this long history. Now, I think I said this in our Patreon page, but I don't think I said this here. Maybe 2 or 3 months back, I went to a group healing with a channel named Paul Selig. So Paul channels and gives messages, and he is what is called a medium for the living. So he reads you. He basically gets into your being and like kind of reads the pattern and the thoughts. I'm sure I'm not explaining it just right, but you'll get the gist. So I asked him about this failure, this health thing, I think I just said, like, I have an issue with my health and is there anything I could do about it? Anything further? Because then you think, well, should I just give up because I feel like a failure? Like, what do I do? Anyway, what he got to was you need to forgive your body for not being what you wanted it to be. Now, take that for what it is, but it hit just like Brooke made a sweet face when I said that. Like, it hit in this really deep place of like awareness. Wow, what am I doing? What is my mind doing that's interpreting me as a failure? And that's turning this into further self-harm. What's the opposite of viewing myself as wrong or a failure or self-harm? Compassion, forgiveness, love, right? Which is, of course, what we'll get more and more to. So Brooke and I sit down like, hey, what's up? And it's like, well, we both have these stories where, you know, in the background, our awareness is an observance. Holy moly, I'm suffering. And not only am I suffering, the perspective that is operating is that I'm wrong and it's all my fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. When we spoke with Matt, I think that was golden rule number 1 in his book, The
I
Universe
think
Always
it
Has a Plan,
was.
which, I don't remember anything I said, but I remember bringing it to the foreground in the conversation because it made such an impression on me, because that's one that I have just seen for years now, that I do that and that I need to unhook from that. And of course, it's a pretty universal condition for those of us who are still heavily conditioned, primarily driven by our ego structure. Excuse me. That is going to be right up there in our awareness. What did I do wrong is like humming in the background so much. What did I do wrong, or what's wrong with me? And of course, we didn't study to come here today, so I don't have Matt's book or like great quotes or anything. But when I think about the moments when that has fallen away for me, which does have the waking from the dream quality, it's so funny to land in that place of like, what is this even idea of like right and wrong? And I don't mean in the moral sense of treating other human beings with goodness and compassion, and other creatures and the earth itself. So I don't mean it in that way, but what even is this idea of defective, and how it runs the show so much, when in reality, like I was saying earlier when we first started talking, we're just having a life, and could I imagine, first of all, I don't actually believe that it's true that life was throwing blockades in my way to buying my house and that I screwed up by not listening. I actually don't. That's what's funny about it, right? I don't know that that's true. Was it an incredibly stressful time and I bought a house? Yeah, yes. Like, and is there now, circumstances beyond my control that make things financially much more of a nail biter? Like, yes, but I also, I can't add any of that up to a meaning. Like, it's just what I'm experiencing, and life is going to keep lifing, right? Like, I don't know what the outcome of that is. Maybe I'll sell my house. Maybe I'll rent my house. Maybe, my finances will turn around. Maybe we'll have a miracle cure. Maybe I'll go bankrupt and my house will be foreclosed on. All of these things are potential options, and none of them are terrible, actually. They're all just whatever is going to happen. And there's no possible way for me to jump into the future. And this is what the ego loves to believe. I can jump into the future, know with certainty what's going to go wrong, so I can jump back into the fake present tense and perfectly control the outcome. That's not true. Like, here I am, and it opens up a really relieving basic trust in life, not a trust that things will always go my way. Like you were saying, Paul Selig had said to you, like, forgive your body for it not being what you, did he say what you want?
I think what you wanted it
what
to
you
be.
wanted it to be. Like, forgive your first house circumstance or your finances, because I also put myself in the pickle of doing my taxes yesterday and my will and grocery shopping, which is like the pandemic trifecta, as a friend said to me. It's like not a good call for mental health. It was a bad decision. But like, forgive life for not being what you expected it to be. Maybe there's not failure attached. It's just, if I look around at my life and if I look at other people's lives, we just all experience a broad diversity of stuff. None of us get out of here without suffering. And so why the need to attach personal, like, my fault, I did something wrong.
Well, it's like, what you and I have spoken about before, we don't want to attach that per se, but that seems to arise, right? And that's what makes this also fascinating and so subtle and so believable is I don't believe we, who I identify as me and who I identify as you, want to make ourselves miserable or see ourselves as wrong, right? So then I see it instead, and these are all just conceptualizations, but the way I work with conceptualizations is just, is it helpful or isn't it? Right. So
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to be capital T, definitive, everyone agrees truth, but like, is this workable or isn't this workable? So I start to look and I say, okay, I don't want to suffer with this anymore. Truly. I don't think you want to suffer with the part of you that wants to make something wrong about you anymore. Right. And so we are not doing anything, certainly not consciously. And how can we be mad at the unconscious part of us? Which is fascinating because we are. We're so mad at what's unconscious to us, or disappointed with, or upset by, or in judgment. But the whole point of unconscious is it's not us. We're not in control of it.
Yeah.
Right? It is what arises. It's part of life, right? It is life. It is lifing. So here we are, we as the conscious participants in this journey don't want that anymore, or maybe never wanted it. But the unconsciousness rises up and says, what's wrong with you now? And here it is again. But it comes up, it's super believable because it's arising within us. I see it as, I'll call it a pattern, right? So I start to get curious, like, where did I develop this perspective that there's a good me and a bad me, and that there's a good me? And how do I know if the good me is running the show? Because everything goes well, all reward, no punishment, all pleasure, no pain, right? And how do I know the bad me? Because something doesn't feel good, right? So this is such a like simplistic model almost, but it is the model probably many to most of us are working with, and it's certainly the model a child has.
Mm-hmm.
If people are happy with me, I did good. If they're not, I did bad. Sometimes a child will think if people are unhappy with me, they're bad. But that's very rare from what I see when I work mostly with energetically sensitive people. So I start to look at like, okay, we have this model in operation. It's just a perspective model. What's fascinating, it's like you said, Brooke, the most honest way we can look at it is there's no meaning to it, right? Like you bought a house, there were other stressors happening. Ta-da,
Yeah,
no
you had that
meaning.
kind of experience of buying a house. Now you're having this kind of an experience of
Right.
financial uncertainty now, and then, and then, and then.
And then, like facts, objective facts. But we apply meaning. And that's the human way, perhaps. That's just part of what we do. We're meaning makers. So then what meaning you apply completely defines your experience. And that's what I find fascinating. If we were to apply the meaning, for example, that this was just your soul's agenda and you were meant to buy this house because something important was going to be realized through this, it's like, oh, yeah, I bought the house. If we apply the meaning that there's an intuition that you missed, you're going to have a different experience. If we
Mm-hmm.
apply the meaning that life's punishing you because you didn't hear the message, you're going to have a different feeling. And where do we get these perspectives from?
Mm-hmm.
Are they cultural? Are they because of a trauma? Did we inherit them? And that's what becomes really fascinating is we would swear to our perspective, but if we keep pulling back the level of magnification, we have to wonder what perspective is clouding my direct experience of reality right now. And further, is it one I even believe in or would consciously align with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm just about to talk to Locke Kelly on Liberated Being as our guest teacher, and we've had him on the show here.
Yay, luck.
Yay, Locke! And he has my favorite inquiry of all time: what is here right now if there is no problem to solve? And what's really interesting, I've worked with that inquiry for years now, and what's fascinating to me about it, many, many, many things. It drops me sometimes into the very granular present moment. But it also makes it very clear how, if I'm in my ego structure, which, that word has just gotten so much like incorrect stuff attached to it, and shame, that we have egos. Like, we all have egos. Thank God. I'm really glad that I know that I'm Brooke, and the difference between me and the chair. And, I'm glad I get to be a person with an experience. And it was a very important part of psychological maturity growing up, right? So I don't mean to do that like, oh, well, I guess I was ego identified, which is totally the spiritual path shame thing, right? We all have an ego, and most of us are living, the vast majority of us are living from the ego identity a very high percentage of the time, which somewhere between 98 and 100% of the time, right? And then as we become more conscious, that percentage diminishes, but we still have an ego structure. Anyway, but one of the things that's really interesting when I use that inquiry of Locke's is it always makes me so clear that one of the primary things that the ego, which I'm talking about is the thing that most of us are living from, the point of view most of us are living from, it only really knows how to solve problems. That's the only thing it knows how to do, is like, what's the problem? And then what's the plan? And it doesn't necessarily carry out the plan. It just wants to keep figuring out problem, plan. And then shame gets in there too, right? Like problem, plan, shame about it not going as planned or whatever, or the problem is your fault in the first place. So if that's what most of us are dealing with for software, for the operating system, then of course there's going to be a lot of problematizing of things. So we can just orient this whole path as a way of being able to see that instead of just being totally meshed with it. And actually, I'll quote you back to you, Vanessa, when you and I had a friend phone call earlier this week, not recorded, although we should just record them and publish them as episodes. We were talking about, I can't actually remember what we were talking about, but other stuff going on in our lives. And you were talking about, related to what you were just saying, but to take it a little further, identifying it as the pattern, right? Oh, I was talking about being in it with like receptivity. Actually, funnily, right? A few days ago, I'm talking about, oh my gosh, there's just this fire hose of good stuff coming my way, Vanessa. Isn't it funny?
I'm dying. It's so true.
Right? Like
just 2 days ago.
Yeah.
It's reality. This is dimension hopping, people.
Exactly. This is dimension hopping. So 2 days ago, it's like, wow, this is a hard time and life is really taking care of me. Like so much support, so many wonderful, loving people coming forward and helping me in the most heartfelt ways, and just seeing when I can receive that and the ways that, and I mean this in a somatic way, because I have been grateful, in the practical, tangible world and received the help, but in my body, seeing how it kind of hits and slides off, and how do I get more comfortable with the capacity to receive goodness. And so, first of all, hilarious, right? A couple of days ago, dimension hopping.
Funny.
And then second of all, you were saying that it's helpful to talk about that internally to oneself as like, it's not that I have problems with receptivity. A pattern has problems with receptivity. Me, the consciousness that lives in this one, wants all of the yum-yums, wants to be able to fully enjoy life. And I mean that with the full spectrum of things, not just the good stuff, but also to fully bring oneself to the grief, the heartbreak, the surprise, to have the full spectrum and to really be able to be here for it. But the patterns have ways of playing out like characters on a stage. Yeah.
Yeah. Inhibiting experience. And, the patterns are contractions in the body, contractions in the fascia. They are contractions in our perspective, limited ways we can see or think about something. They are nervous system dysregulations that happen before we can even blink because something feels familiar to something in the past, right? So these patterns come, and I love that you brought that in because I would like to talk about compassion. You know, we've spoken before about self-compassion, but it's clearer and clearer to me that self-compassion is the gateway to transformation. Nothing really can happen without it because we need truth and we need love. And we either don't understand the truth fully if we don't have compassion, or we can't assimilate truth if we don't have compassion. And compassion without truth can become sappy and sentimental and not really compassionate,
Yeah.
right? Not the real compassion. It could be the Buddhist version of quote unquote idiot compassion. So I start to think the more we can understand the human condition, even if, again, it's not capital T truth, but it's a workable model, it's something that's just helpful. And we start to understand, I think what you and I have been talking about for a long time, Brooke, but we spoke about this in the ancestral episode when we spoke about ancestral trauma. We've spoken about it with empathing, that what we deal with is not as personal to us as we thought. So the way that we seem to have conceptualized of this, and I don't know if it's the advent of psychology and culture that created it. I don't know if it's just the virtue of having an ego structure. I don't know where we got this per se, but we seem to think of it as there's a good me and there's a bad me. There's a good me and there's the wrong me, the flawed me. And the good me is kind of habitually trying to get the bad me to do the right things through judgment, through criticism, through cheerleading, through whatever. But it's all baked into this inner war model. And then we say to ourselves, why can't I just forgive myself for not having the body I need? Or why can't I just not have bought that thing or receive love, like you were saying, Brooke? And that model to me is part of what keeps us cycling in these trances of suffering, because there's an idea that I could do it differently and I am not.
Mm-hmm.
And this inner war, this inner divide plays out all over the place, right? And so I think if we instead start to see that we as humans, as people having a human experience, as spirits maybe having a human experience in a body, we are influenced by numerous things. And it is not just conscious desire or will or aptitudes. We are influenced by our capacity, which our nervous system may regulate. We are influenced by the stories that are told culturally, the stories that we're told in our family, and the stories that we tell ourselves. We are influenced by the fascia that we have, the contractions we have in our body, the DNA we have. We are influenced by the feelings around us in the collective. We are influenced by the state of the earth. Maybe we're influenced by astrology and the stars. Who's to say where that stops? We are an amalgamation of all of these influences. So the whole idea that we think there's just some bad me that's in self-sabotage against the good me, and that we have to be ever vigilantly managing and controlling ourselves, is the very thing I think we're being invited to deconstruct in order to have greater freedom and love and joy.
Yeah, I kind of just want to yell amen a bunch of times after that.
And then hang up. And then
amen, 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 hang up. Yeah, but as you're talking, I'm thinking about another friend of mine who I spoke with this week who was having a hard time, as so many of us are, and she was being so hard on herself about, why am I having such a hard time? You know, so many other people are suffering more. What's wrong with me that I can't handle what my circumstance is in this? And I had said the exact same thing to her. Like, I feel like a lot of where shame gloms on is on the word me, you know, that it's about her and personal failings, that she should be responding a certain way. And she's just the one that she thinks she is, right? When in fact, She is her ancestors. She is in some ways her circumstances, meaning that other people in the household and what's going on with their nervous systems and what she can feel, that there are so many things, and that shame starts not being able to hold up once we start deconstructing how much of a me am I really? Like,
Oh, so good.
I know, like I'm for sure there's something to the me, right? So I'm not trying to swing the pendulum all the way to those kind of non-dual ideas of there's nobody here.
Yes.
Nothing is real. Because that is, again, that's a hilariously dualistic version of non-duality, which I love. So I'm not trying to swing the pendulum that way, but that a me is much more.
It's really the wrong me. I
Yeah.
think that's what you're getting at. It's like,
Yes.
as long as it's about the wrong me, we have such a way or it has such a way of coming into contraction.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're speaking to your friend, when I'm speaking to you, when I'm speaking to a client, it makes perfect sense. There's nothing wrong with you.
Right. Exactly.
It's like
no,
clearer
you're
than
just
clear.
having the experience you're having, and that it's not so concrete, like it belongs to her.
Mm-hmm.
It is an experience that is being filtered through many things.
Mm-hmm.
The conditioning she got when she grew up, the nervous system she grew up around, the nervous system she's around right now, that we're all in that. We all have multiple influences. We're not so concretized as we
Yeah.
think, which actually makes it
There's
much harder to shame ourselves, I find.
as long as we can rest in that, right? As long as that can be integrated, but it's a process.
Mm-hmm.
There's a view I love that I think this might be part of what I want to talk about in Liberated Being. You and I will see, but it's a Hawaiian shamanism view that I got introduced to. So they call it the lower self, but it's really the body. It's the body when you look at the lower self. And what they were saying is that the body is the earth. It is implicitly connected to the earth. And the body is the keeper of memories, which we know from many different areas and traditions. The body is the keeper of memories, but it's not just the keeper of your memories. It has DNA in it. And the DNA are the keepers of the memories of everyone that ever existed in your lineage throughout millennia.
Mm-hmm.
And because the body is connected to the earth implicitly and all the species on the earth, it is aligned with the memories of the whole species and the whole planet. So when I think about this, I think what is arising in me is a reflection of all that we've been through, whether I remember going through it or not, right? Whether I can assign a moment in my life or not. It's a reflection of what the human species has been through. And hilariously enough, did you ever read the book, It Didn't Start With You?
I didn't read the book, but I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
I mean,
familiar with
you
his
and I
work.
are familiar with it, and I recommend it to so many people, and I've never read it.
We're going to have a book club between the two of us. It's a good time for a book club.
My clients who read it, when you hear the way they're connecting dots to what is showing up in present time, to what has happened in their lineage, it is utterly revelatory and fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're diverging down this path for this reason. The invitation with anything that arises in us seems to be the same on repeat. Love the one who's going through it without believing everything that pattern thinks. So the pattern comes up and it says, there's something wrong with you. Something wrong with you. What the fuck is wrong with you? This is what's wrong with you? That's what the pattern really sounds like. And we see it, and we see that no one would think that about themselves. No one would create that level of self-harm unless they were under the trance of some kind of human conditioning that thought humans were shameful and bad, and there was a right and wrong way to begin with, to just operate, to just breathe. Okay, so then we begin to see that. So I don't believe it. I don't get on its side as in, you're right, there is something wrong with her. Oh, poor you for having something wrong. It's not that, but it is this deep understanding of, wow, this is part of the human condition. This is what we struggle with. This is painful. Shame is so painful. The idea there's something inherently wrong with you because you were just doing what a human would do in a moment. We're not even talking about situations in which we've done something that objectively many could argue to be wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here we are living in this looping torment of our own self-criticism and our own judgment and pain. So then we start to look at that and then we breathe. We just acknowledge it for what it is. We see it for what it is. Oh my God, this is a remnant of the human experience. Oh my God, what do I feel when I believe I'm wrong? Oh, sadness is here or shame is here. And we meet that and we breathe. And then we love it and we bring kindness and tenderness and compassion and forgiveness to it. And to the extent that we can do that, something new happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to fill that in because that can be different for everybody, right? But something new happens. The whole thing, I think, for many of us is we don't see it quickly. We see it a year down the line, 20 years down the line, a week down the line, because the trances are very believable. And when we're in it, the nervous system's in it, the
Mm-hmm.
body's in it, the muscles are in it, the thoughts are in it. And, it's like we're asleep to it. So, okay.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, you'll wake up, do the best you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then if we turn that into another finish line, which we endlessly do, like, why am I still in it? Why am I not the one who's transcended the need to do this at all? I find the phrase like, I don't know why, very relieving oftentimes. Like, I don't know why. Like, here I am. This is my experience. All I can do is be honest about it. I get a lot more concerned about the people who move very quickly to establish themselves as other, superior, more awake, different. And I say establish themselves because there is this like, there's a narrative, right? There's a constant storytelling of like, I'm the one that has transcended, blah, 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 blah. I believe there are people who have, so I'm not saying that it's impossible, but for most of us these days, that's not the case. So what we can do is just be honest of like, oh, I'm having a day where this voice is yelling at me internally again and telling me that I'm a total screw up or I made a huge mistake or I failed the spiritual test by not going with the flow or listening to life or whatever. And then that already starts to invite tenderness because instead of being caught by that view, I'm noticing that view, even if I am also still feeling it, in the body and in the nervous system. It starts to soften it. Yeah.
It makes it, that's alchemy, I think. When you can bring the tenderness to the experience, even though you're having the experience, something can alchemize. And isn't that what Neelam said? Like presence is tenderness. Is that what she
Tenderness
said?
and transcendence are one and the same.
Tenderness and transcendence.
So
yeah,
good.
okay, so I'm going to put my own spin on that. It's like Paul Selig says something very much like this. It's like we suffer where we can't see the God in something. And I think often we can't see the divine in ourselves. We can't see the sacred in ourselves. That's one area where really energetically sensitive people or empathic people tend to fall. We can't see it within ourselves. And we certainly struggle to see it within our suffering. And we'll struggle to see it within our patterns because it doesn't feel good. And there seems to be some implicit bias in the body, like feel good equals safe, not feel good equals bad, don't do, right? Just some basic primal bias. And so we realize that like, oh, okay, to be in presence with this, to see the sacredness in this is just to bring tenderness. So we either do the best we can to become present, if that's an access point, or we do the best we can to become tender, if that's an access point. It's really one and the same.
Yeah.
Right.
Because if it's tender as an idea, then we turn it against ourselves too. Like, why can't I be self-compassionate? So instead,
but some
it's
people
honest
access
first.
The energy of open heart, I think, really easy. So they're like tenderness can be like a good cue word.
Yeah.
And some people maybe have great breath practices and they know how to be present as a cue word. But notice if you're present and you're not tender, you're not present.
Right.
Fully.
Right. Because there's something,
That's our opinion. Yes.
right, operational in the mind, which can only live in the past and future and ping pongs
Right. Well,
between the
somehow
two.
you're not seeing the divine in this. If you saw the divine in everything, your heart would be open to it. And I think, as spiritual beings in human bodies, that's part of what we deal with. That's part of the struggle is it's really hard to see the sacred when the outpicturing in the world is what it is.
Yeah.
Right? See, look at it. It looks crazy. It looks chaotic. It looks unfair, unjust. Within ourselves, we suffer unnecessarily based on beliefs that are inherited from traumas of the past. I mean, what? The divine in this? You can't make conceptual sense out of it, right?
No.
But if we can't see the true nature of ourselves, if we can't see anything of value within us, it's very hard to sit with ourselves with genuine tenderness and love. And that's okay. Sometimes trust needs to be repaired. And that's a process. All of this is a process as far as I can tell. I think as far as you can tell. But to the extent that we can start to understand more about ourselves and the human condition and what we're all struggling with, I think it can open up some compassion and it could open up some tenderness and some kindness towards the innocence that is us, that is within us, that just got kind of contracted along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I spoke with Jane Clapp recently on her podcast, and we were talking about, that spirituality is not just keeping the vibes high. I was talking about, because she was saying, there's this irritation about that, right? That, like, look on the bright side, or keep the vibes high, or this is because something amazing is coming. And, and I had just said that that's a misunderstanding, that spirituality is not about better, or bliss, that it's really about meeting reality. And it's not a spiritual podcast, so we didn't get into the depths of it so much, but we are here, right? Like meeting reality doesn't just mean looking out there and labeling things or labeling something in your personal life. Like for me, like house mistake, right? That's a reality. That's the hard reality.
Yeah.
Face it. It's something much more, it actually can't really be put into words. Like it's an inside job of unhooking these things and seeing these things where it's like, oh, the pattern can't receive, but the pattern isn't me. And like me isn't a concrete thing. It's a multitude of many influences that stretch back generations and that also are part of the whole collective that is here right now. And so meeting reality is not about like keeping the vibes high, but it is something that's pretty magical when, as you get closer and closer to it and taste that more and more. It is alchemical, like you were saying. Things really do shift and change when we meet reality without our projections of what reality is or means. Right.
Including ourselves.
Yeah.
Our projections of ourselves and what we are. And I would just add to what you so beautifully said, the me is this multitude. I love the word multitude there. That feels so good, feels so yummy. And there is this I am presence, right? So despite this multitude of influences that go into this human body that does the thing it does, called Vanessa, called Brooke, there is this I am presence, always there, just there. Awareness. That's amazing. And that's us to a certain extent.
Yeah. So, it's a piece. I hold the whole thing in my hands.
Right. Well, because that's the piece, I think, that is there and capable of love, even when something coming up in us is not what we wished it would be. Right? Because otherwise, how could we love ourselves? Like, what would it even mean to love ourselves if there wasn't a piece that loves the rest of it? Anyway, that's a whole other question.
That's part two.
I just opened up my own question box.
Yeah. For next time.
for next time. Till next time, y'all.
Thank you so much for being a part of our community and for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. And that's also where there's more information or links to our private coaching practices. We are both accepting new clients at this time. And we're so grateful for the reviews you've written, for the membership support you've provided, and for all the notes that you send. We'll be back next month.